This is episode 52.
This is The Business of Architecture. Helping architects conquer the world. And here's your host, UCCESS.
Today is the second half of my interview with the firm principals at Motiv, a modern Los Angeles architecture firm. They launched their firm in 2006, and late last year I dropped in and visited their office, so this is actually the first time I have an on-location shoot. I encourage you to hop on over to my YouTube channel or the Business of Architecture show page on businessofarchitecture.com and check out the incredible high-definition video we got on there. There's also a little tour of Motiv's office that they moved into last year that you might want to check out. So in this interview, I get the inside story on how they built a successful modern architecture practice that continues to grow year after year. Here's the show.
And then how many of your leads now come from your website and web presence?
Still a bunch. I would say most of them. I mean, we're starting to get to the point where there's some projects being built, and so people know us that way, or they've just heard about us tied to small lot subdivision. But I mean, there's still multiples per week that are just raw, straight off the web.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one last question for each of you. I'd just like to know about your favorite project since you guys have been together.
I would say that my favorite project so far actually isn't an architecture project. I would say that it's the community outreach we've found ourselves doing lately. I never thought we'd start a firm and sort of become sort of a lobbyist, but with doing small lot subdivision now, we've taken a proactive approach, including all the way down to our staff, to going to local neighborhood councils, community councils, even in some regards other cities, to talk about the benefits of small lot subdivisions in general. And that's been almost a design project in itself, organizing that, trying to figure out how to change people's perspectives on things, get them to think about innovative housing. And to me, that has a greater impact than any one project can.
For me, it's also, it's hard to pinpoint one project. This is odd, I don't feel very sentimental about them when they're done. I feel like we kind of do our job and then hand them off to future home people that live in them. In our case, we don't know those people. They come and they buy it after it's built for the most part. But so for me, I think I always say, like, my most exciting project is the next project. So the next one that comes in the office. And I think I'm most excited about this idea, which we're starting to get to now. We were explaining earlier how we've expanded a lot in the last year. I like coming in and starting to have an idea where our staff is managing the project and we're just kind of dabbling in it. Like, we come in for design reviews, we're in the major meetings, but that's actually what excites me the most, is that the projects are happening and we have our hands in them, but the less we have our hands in them, and like our young staff is actually bringing the projects along, and I like to see the excitement that they have in like getting those opportunities to manage projects at a young age, because I feel like I was given those opportunities too, and it's really nice to see. And so I'm almost most excited to see one of their projects that they're managing make it all the way through and built, and just to see like that reaction that or what it brings to them or what it can fulfill in their life.
Well, that's great. You guys are really leaving a legacy. I know my mentors did that for me too, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, since we have you guys here, I also want to ask you, tell me about your design philosophy, because we're not just talking about the business of architecture here. You guys have a very distinctive design philosophy.
Yeah.
Who would like to speak on that? Derek, you have the mic, man. Go ahead.
I've been losing my voice the last few days, so
oh, yeah.
I'm trying to save it. Actually, it's better today than yesterday. That's a really tough question.
What drives your design? I think Michael
answer.
touched on it a little bit.
I think for us, what people always tend to ask is, are you getting bored of this small lot subdivision because you're very focused on this one project type? And to me, the answer is clearly no, because I think for us, the design philosophy comes from what do we and what do our friends and what does maybe even our generation want in LA? And that is a cool, relatively attainable place to live that doesn't cost you a lot, where you can bike to work or walk to a restaurant, walk to a bar, and not have to sit on the freeway or live out in the boonies and commute in. So I think it's driven more to like a really personal level. And that's sort of how we got into this product type, was what can we do from an architecture and now a construction side to better the city. And so it's less about style, it's less about those things, it's more about that kind of goal. And then for us, I think what makes it interesting is, even though they're mostly in city of LA, every neighborhood, which I didn't even know growing up, I lived on the west side, but every neighborhood is so unique in Los Angeles. And the other day, Christian and I drove out to a new job site, and we've been on this major street with restaurants. I'm like, I've never been here in my life, and I lived in LA my entire life. And so I think the neighborhoods drive a lot for us, like seeing the neighborhood and how can we sort of conform our modern aesthetic to that neighborhood. And then also every client brings like a new interesting challenge. What are their goals? What do they think is interesting? So I think those sort of two things, the site context and then the client and their personalities, and bringing those things together along with our desire to kind of really better the city, make it a good place.
Awesome. It would be great to look back in 10 years at this conversation and see where you guys are at. So tell me, where do you think you'll be in 10 years? And in 10 years, I'll send you an email or give you a call, and we'll say, hey man, let's see where you guys are at. So tell me, where do you think you'll be in 10 years, or what would you like to be?
I'm hopefully like a beach in Cabo, and I just call in once a week, or so,
It is Friday.
Something like that. So I don't know. I think more of a, we talked about this earlier, more of a total turnkey solution, I think, for getting projects like this built, whether that's through clients coming to us or sort of our next jump is developing them ourselves and taking that to a new level. But I always like to say, like in this office, I feel like there aren't a lot of egos. There's a collective ego, a motivative ego, but I don't think there's a Christian, Derek, Michael ego in this office. So we don't care where the ideas come from, as long as the whole group gets credit is what's most important. So as the firm grows, doesn't really matter who's designing it, who has what roles, as long as I think there's a group success and a group accomplishment for the whole team. Yeah.
I'd say the only thing I'd want to add to that is, we have the great joy of creating this interesting housing all over Los Angeles. And at the end of the day, one of the hardest things is always to turn that over to the developer, the new owner, and they get to move in and the staff moves on. I'd say, for the most part, 99% of our staff rents. They never have the opportunity to live in what they design, and I think that's a lot for most people in this design world, in this field of architecture. You rarely get to live in the product that you're designing for other people. So we have a sort of personal goal to figure out a way to get every one of our staff members in a project that they've designed or that they've developed on their own, so that they can get the idea of what it's like to experience it. So in 10 years, I'd like to look back and see that everybody's living in one of these themselves.
Yeah, great. That's amazing. One thing that I'm glad that you guys took the time to sit down with me and have this conversation is that there's a lot of other up-and-coming young architects like here within your office, but also obviously out there on the internet who see you guys and what you guys are doing. So you guys have become, and are becoming sort of a figurehead for them. They look at you, man, I would really like to do what they're doing. So Christian, since you have the mic, what would you say to a young architect out there who wants to start his or her own firm? What one piece of advice would you give them to help them achieve that and get to where you guys are at?
I would say, most people immerse themselves in the world of architecture as much as possible. Probably 100% of their time is in the world of architecture. I would say to take a step back from that, get out of the world of architecture and understand what everybody else is doing in other types of business. I would say that most of what we've experienced and advice we've gotten to become successful hasn't been in the architecture world. It's been with other entrepreneurs that have started their own businesses and even failed. Lawyers, other business people, MBAs. Number one, I would say go get an MBA. Instead of going to graduate school in architecture, go to get your master's of business from a good school. Everything is in this world revolves around business, and if you don't have a good, strong core understanding of that, it's going to be hard for you to sell your great ideas and do the design work to the people that are ultimately paying for it, which are people that are really schooled in the world of business, not architecture.
Yeah. Shameless plug for Business of Architecture, and if you want to find out more about business, feel free to visit the Business of Architecture, right? And in addition to getting an MBA, what other ways what other examples or concrete steps would you recommend that someone do or follow to get to, yeah, you okay over there? Okay. Yeah, to get the business experience, like you said, to get that business education. I'm sorry. But you also mentioned learning from other entrepreneurs. I'd like to dig into that just a little bit more and figure out, how they can leverage that.
I would say in the school level, join clubs in school, networking groups that are outside of the architecture school itself, whether that means you're joining a fraternity or a sorority or, a business group. Once you get out of school, it's a very similar process. I mean, whether you're dealing with, ULI, young, real estate development groups, people, there's a lot of things out there outside of the world of architecture that people are doing. Networking is key. I mean, I don't think any of us would be in the situation we're in today if it wasn't for leveraging relationships that we had, fresh out of school. And so I think that's key is building up that network, because ultimately architects don't hire other architects to do work. It's the other people out there. So, spreading that network and growing it is key.
Okay. So you mentioned the Urban Land Institute, ULI. Is there a favorite networking niche or resource that you would just say, hey, if you're really looking for something to do tomorrow, go step out and join this club or this organization?
I think for us, the ULI was a big one. It allowed us to meet other people that are tied into this field but aren't necessarily designers or architects or engineers. Okay. But at the end of the day, I think it's anything that you're ultimately passionate about. You could be, really into sports. You could be really into, whatever it is. There's some kind of group out there, and somewhere within those groups is going to want good design. And if you can latch onto those people and their opportunities and sort of ride that wave, it can open up doors for you.
Awesome. Any other words of advice for other young up-and-coming designers? Because hopefully they'll find this.
I only say it because it was just on that topic, what Christian was just saying, but I often tell people when I tell our kind of story of how we started that if you plan on starting an architecture firm, especially in like your late 20s, like we did, late 20s? Yeah, we were late 20s. The only people that are going to hire you are family and friends, because nobody really trusts an architect that doesn't have anything built under their name when they're in their late 20s. And so what Christian said is completely valid. So strangers aren't probably not going to hire you. They're not going to look at your website and come in and see a face with no wrinkles and no gray hair and say, I'm hiring that person. So finding those friends and those connections and finding people that trust you is important, because when they're buying architecture, they're spending more money than they're going to spend on anything. It makes a car look like peanuts as a purchase. So you have to have an ultimate trust with people. And strangers don't tend to trust architects in their late 20s or even early to mid 30s. So you have to have that. And for us, that was partially that, and then partially focusing on something where we feel like we knew it as well as anyone else. And that was a small lot subdivision ordinance.
Gentlemen, thank you for sitting down with us. And, is there an opportunity for us to go around and meet the people in the office, or maybe just get a tour of the office and see the people that make this machine run? Okay. Let's do it.
A lot of them are at the same.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for riding along on another show about the business of architecture. I want to know your opinion about today's episode. Visit businessofArchitecture.com/podcast or send me an email at show@businessofarchitecture.com with your feedback about today's show. And remember, visit businessofarchitecture.com/free to grab your free membership pass to Business of Architecture Insider, where you'll have first access to free resources to help you run a great business. See you next week.
Everybody knows that you just gotta do it anyway.
The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you run a great business. But music credit to Ben Folds 5. Do it anyway.